Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome back to Progress Podcast. I'm joined today by the wonderful Patrice Gomes Jr. How are
Good
you,
afternoon.
Patrice?
Good, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, pretty good. Glad to be here.
had a good weekend.
Yeah, a little stressful, but we're here.
You've been up and about. You were at UNGA with the
Yeah,
Prime
we were
Minister.
at Onga with the Prime Minister. Then
Uh,
I had
just
a
explain UNGA.
yeah. So Onga is the UN General Assembly. It's basically where all the world governments and leaders come together to discuss every single issue you can imagine, from Ukraine to wars that are going on around the world, to basically cost of living, to how we can basically refinance how the world borrows to countries,
Yeah,
peacekeeping missions, any single possible thing. From there, went on to Miami to meet the new Dutch Consul General, speaking about our relationship um, with our office in Miami, basically,
yeah,
because tourism, shipping, logistics all comes out of Miami for St.
yeah.
Martin. And then the last stop was basically Santo Domingo, and had a whole discussion with our regional ambassadors. So every Dutch ambassador from Canada down to Chile, discussing everything from regional security to multilateralism to cooperation and climate change, and
Yeah.
how we can work together to basically change our policies
Okay.
at our office.
And
So it's pretty
just
busy.
to go back a bit to what you said about changing how global finance is done, is that
Mhm.
the Bridgetown Initiative bit that's been pushed by Mia Mottley, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, to kind of redo how global
Essentially,
finance and
yeah.
aid is
So I mean, it's part of it. Essentially, what's happening now is a whole discussion going on around something called MVI, which is multi-dimensional vulnerability index. Yeah, full, not in a good way. But simply speaking, it's just looking at how currently banks' global financing is given based on your GDP,
yeah,
and how much money your country makes. And the reality is that small countries, small and developing states, get a lot of issues that happen that can impact your ability to pay back. So, for example, St. Martin is listed or considered a very wealthy country, but in the midst of a hurricane, in terms of energy, in terms of cost of fuel, cost of transportation, we're very vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it's looking at basically how you can lobby to have the whole entire world rethink that GDP is not the only thing you use to calculate, also your vulnerability.
yes,
So you can have $10 today, but if you're vulnerable to get robbed or sick or any other thing, chances are those $10 are not going to be worth much in the long term.
right, right,
Looking at how we can sort of rethink how we borrow, and for St. Martin, I think it's pretty important because we're not independent. A lot of discussions around financing, cost of living, that has to come to the forefront in terms of our discussion with the Netherlands, in terms of how we basically borrow, how much we borrow, and also for other countries who aren't independent,
right.
at what rate or how they are viewed in terms of borrowing money.
Okay,
So it's a pretty big undertaking. I think the MVI linked into what Mia Motley is doing, and I think for St. Martin we're very small, but we try and do our best to sort of put our message out there that, hey, we're also in the kingdom, but guess
Yeah.
what? Hurricane Irma turned us into a pretty much a very vulnerable country, despite our constitution or how much money you think we make.
yeah,
So yeah,
exactly. Okay, and that argument about not about using more than GDP to calculate, value, etc. I think that's been something that we've also had a lot of local people talking about. That we have to shift our perception interpretation then of that.
yeah.
Was there good coffee at the Ungarn?
I wouldn't know because for me, like I know you're a coffee fanatic, but yeah, I'm a bush tea kind of
Kind of
old
guy,
school Caribbean
bush tea
guy.
kind of guy.
Yeah.
Well, here at the Progress Podcast, I drink coffee. Nelly also drinks coffee. So last time it was a good, he was like, I do. He needs it. So we start off with a coffee fact. And today's coffee fact is the most expensive coffee actually in the world. Black Ivory Coffee, which is a brand of coffee that's produced by the Black Ivory Coffee Company Limited in northern Thailand. From Arabica coffee beans that are consumed by elephants and then collected when the elephants poop them out. So there is something in the elephant's digestive tract that kind of breaks down the proteins in a different way and gives it its unique flavor. The company says that they work to rescue elephants from tourist trap rides and stuff. But it is among the world's most expensive because it clocks in at $2,000 per kilogram.
$2,000 per kilogram.
United States dollars.
So we're basically looking at a decent salary in St. Martin for
Yeah.
a kilo of coffee.
For a kilo of coffee.
That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
So go out in your yard, pick your lemongrass, and put a little hot water on that, and you drink that. Okay?
Yeah. At that, I think I too would switch to bush tea and
Yeah.
just repurpose the backyard for the lemongrass. But at the same time, I don't think you have to drink black ivory coffee to
No.
spend a lot of money on coffee. I mean, I've seen the cost of even my instant Nescafe Colombiana coffee go up substantially, and I think it ties into the bigger discussion of cost of living, which is something that we wanted to touch base on today. And how increasing cost of living, whatever it's driven by, because there are many factors to consider, how it's impacting on people. And I know that you're pretty passionate. You've been very consistent about talking about our need to establish a poverty line for St. Martin and such. So if you could maybe talk a bit about that and how you view the current global reality tying into that.
Yeah, I think, you see a lot. And I think we've been having this discussion, in politics, outside politics, that St. Martin, everyone has this sort of view of St. Martin as very wealthy and well-to-do Caribbean country, and we all get paid relatively well compared to other Caribbean countries. But always the question comes up, what is the basis for this sort of salary that we have? And I find it interesting because as much as we are doing well as a country in numbers and how much we get paid compared to other Caribbean countries, the question is not how much you get paid, is how much you get paid actually enough to live on St. Martin.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally what we lack, and it's a known fact, there is no established poverty line on St. Martin.
Right.
Recently the minister indexed the pensions as well, and they looked at increasing as well by a couple of cents or a few cents the minimum wage, and that's all well and good. So cheers to that. But I mean, you're indexing something that you have no poverty line or to actually use as a basis. And I know that there's consultations that happen, of course, not some willy-nilly number. But again, the poverty line will tell you how much you actually need. And I think there was a recently in Curacao about 2 years ago, Curacao did a poverty line where it was estimated they needed about,
I think it was a 2,500 gallons.
25,
26.
No, it was actually quite high. It was, and I think, about 3,000 guilders. And I think they said that St. Martin would have needed about 2.5 to 3 times that as a minimum to survive in St. Martin.
Yeah.
And I tell myself, most people don't even make about a third of that. So, how do you look at justifying this sort of billion-dollar economy we live in without considering the social aspects of people who actually need to live here?
Yeah.
And I think you brought up another interesting conversation we had just before we went live. The average cost of coffee has gone up to the record high last year. And I mean, coffee, I don't drink it, but coffee is something that everybody needs. And if you in a society where you have to have 2-3 jobs in a day to survive,
sometimes that's
you drinking that coffee for food.
Yeah.
And if you can't afford coffee, it's gone too high. Where do we go? So I think that's one of the things that we have campaigned hard on that, looking at establishing a poverty line, looking at different elements of poverty, because again, if you have sort of not enough money to survive, every other thing falls apart. Your general health falls apart. The things you can spend money on, period poverty, because again, you sort of champion that a lot in Parliament, period poverty. I'm not going to spend the money necessarily on sanitary hygiene care if I have to buy a can of beans. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things we look at, like, it seems like, here we go again, the poverty line, but it impacts everything, education, your access to healthcare. And I mean, there's been a lot of discussion recently about introduction of a national health insurance, and it all sounds great.
Which is also something we're going to touch on today. Because it in my closing remarks for the closing of the parliamentary year, a lot of people, I got feedback from people on how I paused and kept asking, what's the actual plan? The general health insurance, the NHI, whatever. I think that the current term is the Sustainable Affordable Healthcare Act. And I think one of my main concerns about it is what is the plan with that? The feedback that we're hearing from in the community, from in the healthcare community, and the health professionals community, is that there's not been much consultation from them on official drafts. Like it's more like and I think it's good to say that, you know, if we're gonna write this paper together, and I write it and I give it to you and I say this is what we're doing, that's not consultation.
No.
You know, that's me informing of what is gonna happen. Consultation is when we decided we're gonna do it, we sit, we meet, and we write it together basically, and it kind of has your insights, my insights, and that's how we move forward. But now it's the feedback that we're getting, and I say we as in the PFP faction in Parliament, is that there has not been that consultative shift. And I listened to some of the minister's explanations on the plan for this law, and I don't know. I'm concerned about what the plan for paying it.
Yeah.
You know, there and again, healthcare is very critical. It's always a ticklish subject because nobody wants to put a price on caring for another human being.
Exactly.
You understand? And it's difficult. But at the end of the day, in this capitalist world that we live in, someone has to pay for something.
Yeah.
And a lot of the coverage sounds nice.
Yeah.
But I also look at the example of Aruba, who passed something similar, and then within 2 years they had to put an injection into their industry to kind of kickstart it and make it work. And there's been consistent injections thereafter. And then we see when COVID came around, and then the cohort came around, and then the assessments came around, one of the first things they had to cut from is their healthcare budget, because it was astronomical.
Yeah, by I think a couple
100 million actually.
100 million.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, you know, I think for me, we've proposed us very much on being a people-centric party, but I think, you know, again, kudos for the minister for picking up this, because this has been a file that, you know, we know the initiative is already done to sort of draft a national health insurance for St. Martin. Under previous governments fell, so it kind of pushed aside, and here we are again. So kudos to the minister picking that up, and you know, no one can argue against having a national health insurance in principle. But I think, like you said, and I think there was a study done, from what I understood, where they said that for St. Martin, it's very hard to sustain a national health insurance with all that's required, given our small population.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that sort of concerns me is that, you know, government can put forward a policy, and then say, here is our policy, give us feedback, and let's work together. But if, as the minister indicated, the plan is to have that in place by January 2024, which is, let's count on our fingers, because NAF was never my thing, November, December, January, 3 months. If you're trying to create a whole new health,
and it is that it's a complete shift of how healthcare is done. And you know, over the years, like you said, it's been there. So definitely, we don't want things to stagnate, especially when work has been done. But sometimes it comes a point where work has been done and you need to do an about shift, because various stakeholders have voiced their concerns, and that mainly being, you know, SHCA, the healthcare organizations, the psychologists, the paramedicals, the general practitioners, you know, White Yellow Care, Crossing Care. They have all kind of signaled it. And then earlier this year, right before Parliament went on summer recess, you had the Swaliga Employers Association also kind of chiming in to say, you know, they have deep concerns on the direction of our healthcare system, in particular when it comes to and I think they were mentioning it especially in regards to the wage cap increase at SFA, which if anybody has connections in private sector, you have been bombarded by complaints. That's been my my outlook. But of course, that concern coming from a private sector background is why I voted against the law. You know, because it was going to increase premiums and not necessarily improve care. By shifting them from under a private insurer. So now the intention is to also put this national health insurance on top of SFA. And you made an important point when you spoke before, that it really turns into a game of numbers. Insurance, pensions, those types of financial, I don't like the word scheme because it's not nice, but it's a term that's programs, depend on numbers.
Exactly. I think, you know, so pivoting back and forth between what we're seeing now with SFA, you know, globally, pension age is going up and up and up because people are living longer. And we're seeing that SFA has had to sort of, you know, we've had to increase the salary threshold to include to sort of fund SZV. And the reality is that with a small population like St. Martin, when you have to do things like cancer treatments and sort of and more costly procedures, the persons who are unemployed are going to benefit, but the more and more persons who are unemployed or paying very minimum contributions, how do you fund for a continuously aging population those more costly procedures? And I think one of the things too that we've been people always, oh yeah, well the front side has it, and we spoke about this last night actually, coincidentally, where we said the front side has a small population, but their whole entire health system is backed by 49 million people in the whole French Republic. St. Martin's health system is backed by just St. Martin. So again, I think we had a couple of discussions about this in the past, piggybacking, joining the whole, maybe the Dutch national health insurance plan, and I kind of stand, of course, from a nationalistic point of view, that's not interesting, but you have to think sometimes not about ego, but also about sustainability. And I think that's one of the many challenges I've seen lately. A lot of our decisions are based on, I need to have this with my name on it.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, I want to just create something for everybody to benefit.
Yeah. We do have a question from Edwina. Thank you for joining, Edwina. And she asked, just chimed in, thank you for sharing. I don't know if this has already been explained, but can you explain the differences in what St. Martin has now and what a national insurance is? So I'm going to just go based on the notes that I took down based on the minister's Facebook Live, where he explained answered some questions, I guess, that have been coming through via the public or via others. So indeed, coverage for many people is kind of added. You have the very important addition of sole proprietorships, so bus drivers, taxi drivers, etc., who can now receive coverage under SZV. Currently, they are not able to. Then he also outlined that the Healthcare Act is based on individual premiums with regard, there is a copay basically. If you and your spouse are working, a premium is required. But if you or your spouse is not working, there's no required premium, as the premium is based on a percentage of your salary, and 0% of 0 is 0. So you'll get coverage even through unemployment, and if you happen to fall unemployed, then your premium requirements, your copay will drop down to 0. Kids are also going to be insured, but at no cost to anybody. It's going to be subsidized by the government. And that's an area where I'm like, okay, what's going to pay for this subsidization of kids? And there will be certain elements added in terms of preventive care. So you are able to get access to more screenings, which you can get now, I think.
Yeah.
Because essentially a blood test is a screening. However, there are more advanced screenings for especially cancers, certain cardiovascular issues. So it kind of reads like there's going to be a boost in referrals to specialists.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting, and I know that Edwina will understand what I mean when I say that even if you look at the Netherlands' own brand of sort of universal healthcare, where there's a basic insurance that's set at one price, and then the insurance companies compete on stuff like dental and everything. Even up there, over the last 7 years, there's been consistent trimming of what is covered. For women's health, for example, when you turn 30, you used to be referred to a specialist to get a pap smear, But now in the Netherlands, when that happens, your house doctor is doing it. That's already the case here. So now my thing is, so are we going to switch it back to, because those are also preventive care methods. So, but if there is a specialist doing that, the specialist has to be paid.
Yeah, and I think that's one, and I think this is kind of why the attendance at the town hall that happened related to this was so big, because again, this document comes out stating January 1st, and the people who have to implement it have about 3 months to figure it out.
Yes.
And I'm not sure necessarily if we're going to have to really be honest and say okay, this is not going to happen January 1st. Or if you have to basically go back to the drawing board, because a lot of it down to what generic medications, a lot of persons have reached out to sort of the PFP and said, they need specialized medications. is that going to be additional costs as well to the government? I think it's a lot of questions you have to sort of ask ahead of revamping a system. And I mean, I don't profess to be a medical doctor, but
Yeah.
I can tell you just straight up facts. If you propose a massive shifts like this in 3 months to anybody, it's a bit of a concern.
It is a deep concern, and I think one more thing that was kind of added, again based on the minister's own words, was palliative care. So he mentioned cancer treatment, etc. But palliative care goes beyond that. You know, it's specialized medical care that focuses on pain relief, for example, other symptoms of serious illness, but also helping you address the side effects of certain medications that you're on.
Yeah.
You know, so all of that is palliative care. It's not as simplistic, I think, as is being made to sound. So yeah, I'm very Edwina added, yes, correct. They have been trimming and the premiums are going up yearly, with this year having the highest proposed jump in terms of the basis, or well, anyway, or you know, in terms of what can be added on. Sorry, now that we're having a conversation.
Yeah, but I
with
think,
Edwina
and I think, you know, it's interesting because again, we're looking at increase in contributions from the average person, but then how do you actually fund the care? Because again, like we said, minimum contributions by a lot of people, and it goes back to the thing of cost of living, because you're going to take more from the salary, then you may be unable to actually get the full care coverage quality that you're used to. And I think it's a number of things that we see coming up. Again, I think the question always remains, how does this premium increase impact my pocket? And in the long term, is it going to be beneficial if it's not sustainable for the long term?
Yeah.
You know, we've seen SZV, for example, and sort of going back and forth between these sort of different government-related agencies and instruments, SZV has a problem with basically solvency, and you see it, for example, where government gave SZV the government building because government had a debt to SZV, and they couldn't pay their debt, so they gave them the government building. Fast forward a couple of years ago, government has a debt to SZV again. We've given them a piece of land behind the hospital.
Yeah.
So we're actually making it bigger and bigger and bigger, and including more people to actually fund these different sort of health instruments. But we're seeing more and more that it's not necessarily sustainable how it's done for St. Martin.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the worry of a lot of people that I've been speaking to about this national health insurance is to see how sustainable is this?
Yeah.
And are we just looking at basically governments having more and more debt in the future?
Yeah.
And how does that impact then the
overall cost of living?
The cost of living and government's ability to actually fund programs that actually supposed to help people, like social welfare, like you know, funding for schools. And that's the thing, like you're going to put the money into this, but then how to take away from other things that people also need.
And it's an overall kind of ecosystem that, you know, that's usually how ecosystems work. If one thing tumbles down, everything else also kind of tumbles.
Yeah.
But this coming week, actually, this is going to be a topic of discussion. So there is a pending public meeting on the general health insurance. It was requested by MPs Emmanuel, Heiliger Martin, and Westcott Williams. So interested to see what is presented, if the date has changed, you know, and what questions will be asked and what answers will be received by members of parliament regarding this. But further to that, I mean, I think healthcare is on a lot of people's minds, because, you know, we were asked yesterday also a bit about the hospital and its status, and so there are all these different moving parts. I don't envy the minister or anyone, but I do think that, you know, being transparent and just communicating honestly and openly, respectfully with people.
Because I think, you know, and I think like you said, we spoke about it last night, and, you know, globally, costs of everything from the raw material to the actual service that comes with the raw material being produced, XYZ, all of that's going up. And, you know, what's not going up is people's salary. And we're not going to sit down here and pretend like, oh, PF is going to give everybody 1,000 extra guilders tomorrow. But they need to have a discussion at the government level, policy level, really, okay, this is happening globally. We have the cost of materials going up. shipment going up. You spoke about it briefly, actually, just before we start, that, climate change and the cost are very intertwined. I mean, and the reality is that the cost of your coffee is going up because guess what?
Rain.
There's less rain in some places.
There's less rain in Brazil.
And then that means that there's actually less of
coffee
the actual bean. And, it seems like, something so abstract and whatever, but, it impacts people. So this is happening up here in terms of we have no control over what the cost of things are here, but how is government sort of trying to mitigate those costs locally?
Yeah.
And I think one of those many things that we've constantly said is that you have to look at this holistically. And I think we've seen it now after COVID. Everyone's complained and everyone says, things are back to normal. But guess what? The cost of everything globally has still gone up.
Yeah.
So when you have a national health insurance, the cost of the raw materials for medicines, the cost of the instruments that's all going to go up. What is the bigger plan in terms of cost of living adjustment?
Yeah.
I think as a civil servant, I can tell you we haven't had a cost of living adjustment since 2013 when I just came in. 2012, 2013, they indexed it by half. And that has not been indexed by the other half or any other piece of a half since 2012, 2013. And I think, a lot of civil servants are living paycheck to paycheck. Most of them actually earn below scale 10. So we're looking at basically anything below about 5,000 guilders gross, 6,000 guilders gross. And we're the quote unquote best salaried persons on St. Martin. So how does everybody else in society actually operate? Looking at everything from COVID, the cost of living, the ongoing war in Ukraine. I touched on a bit about that when I first spoke about running again this election. But what I lack is a lot of that sort of comprehensive discussion about we're doing all of this, we're going to substitute this way here. And I think that's one of the things that I really hope that we can have sort of a serious discussion about in the future. I think in our manifesto, we kind of wrote about it, how we plan to sort of discuss that. I'll come with sort of in a couple of weeks to come. But I think your starting point is basically an honest conversation with people that, yes, we're a tourism-based economy, so you need persons to work in service-oriented sectors, but how do you then allow them to live here in this kind of economy with the kind of salary you're giving them? And that's where government has to play a bigger role in sort of subsidize. I don't want to say with subsidies, but in terms of government has to make policy injections to basically support and sort of cushion that blow of the fact that we live in a tourism-based economy where everything is in dollars, and people are earning pretty much very close to minimum wage guilders.
We have another question. Joseph Travin, welcome, Joseph. So good day was the take on waste management and St. Martin's part or take on climate change. So we've spoken very publicly about, even last campaign, about the dump, about how our waste management approach to it has to improve. Now, most of that is kind of under the NRPB via the trust fund. So there is a relocation plan, and then there is a control plan for addressing the state of the dump. But I think our issues here with waste management, Lucho, one of our candidates, speaks a lot about this, where he talks about how we have to begin disposing of waste better. Most times, I think the general sentiment here is that you just throw it outside, and it'll just, somehow the elves will come at night and it'll be gone. Fridges, I've seen so many weird things left right there by the bin in where I live in Defiance. From refrigerators to drawers, bed frames, mattresses, all kinds of electronics and such, which in larger countries, there are very strict rules for disposing of them. Batteries, I saw someone threw a car battery in the bin, and I'm like, that's not supposed to go there.
I think if you don't care about the environment, that's lesson number one. You're a child, that battery acid.
Yeah, exactly.
In a dump isn't something.
It's not a good idea. So I think that that project is running separately. In terms of climate change, though, like I mentioned to Patrice, before we went live, and even just now as he touched briefly, I don't think put enough thought into it. For example, there's a lot of talk about agriculture, but I have yet to hear anyone talk about the solution for water. Most of our farmers have complained about water. They've even in the past, I know some of them have asked for subsidy from government regarding water from GB. So I think we also touch on that a bit in the manifesto once that is comes out to you guys. But I think that we do have to blend it into our thinking more and more. How does climate change impact us? We can't make big steps for the rest of the world, I think, but for ourselves locally, in terms of our own air pollution, in terms of our own water pollution, we can. Like, for example, you have a scenario now where there's dredging happening in the lagoon. And I'm pretty sure that one of the main reasons why it had to happen is because we had some heavy rains and you had a lot of runoff from projects and from construction and digging out in the hills, cutting out in our hillsides, especially in this particular area. Where it's gonna usually end up in the lagoon, and it changes the landscape of the lagoon, because if your boat needs a certain amount of draft, of water depth, and that was possible last week, but I know after a week of rain, there's enough silt to raise the floor of the lagoon 8, 9, 10 inches. All of a sudden, that boat that could come in a week ago can no longer come in. And I think, that's why we've spoken a lot in Parliament about better policies when granting building permits that make developments incorporate some type of catchment strategy where they minimize or prevent entirely the runoff that hits the lagoon, which is arguably, one of our most important bodies of water.
But I think, in terms of even the question, I think is also sort of what is St. Martin's part that they can play, correct me if I'm wrong, in sort of the climate change. And I think, like Melissa said, for us at St. Martin, we see our dump as a massive issue. And for our scale, it is. The fires that used to happen quite often a couple of years back, they've been stopped. But I mean, in terms of what our contribution to climate change is really minimal. But we are the first persons to be impacted by climate change.
Definitely.
We actually wrote, when we were in the UN, we wrote some speaking points for Prime Minister, which he had to basically say that climate change, and particularly climate migration, Antigua and Barbuda, our neighbors, just a little 45-minute flight away. Barbuda, after the hurricane, was completely uninhabitable. So there was literally people having to leave Barbuda because of climate change, because hurricanes are happening more and more often. They're actually happening less,
but
stronger.
Last
year, I think there was a record number of category 4 or 5 hurricanes. This year, less. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're the persons who are impacted the most. And I think for St. Martin, what we do in terms of climate mitigation, climate policy initiatives are going to be minimal globally. But what we can do, and sort of working at Foreign Affairs, we sort of promote this a lot. You have to be the voice. You have to lobby towards the bigger world changing sort of what they do. I think Mia Motley is doing that very well. I think from our Foreign Office, we've been doing a lot of that in terms of pushing this current Prime Minister, and I think she's definitely, her heart is there, I must say, for climate change, but it needs to be a cross-ministerial initiative. And I think that's the biggest problem with government. Everything is still in silos. So everyone sees PM or Foreign Affairs going to UNGA or as the AZ thing, as the General Affairs thing, the PM thing. But again, how does climate change impact tourism? How will it impact the persons in St. Peter's Hills and Dutch Quarter who trying to plan to cut costs? Guess what? You're trying to cut costs, but there's very little fruit coming up because there's no rain. So until we start looking at these things in terms of not just, oh, she gone again on a trip, or oh, he gone again on a trip, look at it from the bigger point of view of how is this going to impact us in the long term? Because we spend a lot of money, for example, fighting climate change, and that impacts, guess what, our finance. So the more money towards that, the less money towards things like social programs, healthcare, education.
Tim asked, hi Tim, can you address vehicle safety? The motorcycle just speeding. It's a noise nuisance. Yes, it is. But most of them are causing harm to other drivers. That also impacts tourism. You're absolutely right. In fact, I had dinner with a friend of mine who's just moved here from Atlanta, about 2 months ago, and his main complaint was these motorcyclists and these scooters, and it's less. I don't even mind them as a vehicle. I'll tell you why. In most countries, they're very well regulated. In the Netherlands, this zooming in and out, even in the States, this zooming in and out between cars is not something that they are allowed to do. And I think here they have very little regard for their own life, to be honest. But also for the mental capacity of other drivers. Like I think the trauma of maybe clipping somebody, it sticks with you. But I think short of banning them, I'm not sure, because you would really need a increased police presence and increased police attention. But then it also begs the further question: do we have the budget to put police onto such a thing as regulating motorcycles, scooters, etc.? I do think that in terms of the controls that are done, when they are done, you kind of see like a dip in the noise on the road. But then somebody told me once that someone got his scooter confiscated, and then as we all know, you just bebop over to the front side, and you get yourself another scooter.
Yeah, but I think beyond, I mean, that's reality, and that's why we always stress cooperation with the French. And I think beyond, control, I think, I'm not a person who believes very strongly on punishment and punitive measures. I think you saw it in the French side recently when President Muzzington went into Sandy Ground, actually, and sat down and spoke to the boys on the bike and explained to them, what are your concerns, what are your issues, and a conversation as to, listen, how can we do this together? Because at the end of the day, to buy a bike, it's pretty cheap. To buy a car, more expensive. To insure a car, even more expensive. And the reality is, half of the bikes aren't even insured. And I think it's a question about having a discussion about a mentality shift. Because for the life of me, I wouldn't understand why you would want to wheelie going uphill or wheelie in a corner. Is it for the likes on Instagram, TikTok? Sure. But chances are you could die. And I think it's a mentality change of basically understanding why are kids on these scooters, why are they doing this? A lot of it is pent up energy. A lot of it is nothing to do. A lot of it is basically economic. So understanding, and I know everyone says, even with the thing of the racing, it's also related to drag racing. People like to say, oh, if we have a space to drag race a bike, it wouldn't be on the streets. And my reality is, I'm like, no, that's not true. Because on a lot of other good days, there's a lot of empty parking spaces, and they're still on the street doing it. So having a drag strip or a place is not going to solve the issue, because it's not a question of space. It's a question of mentality. I think it's a question of understanding the risk you take.
I want to say, this is something that I also said in a meeting where this, concept of a drag strip was discussed, where I said, most of if you look, I know bike life people. I went to school in Miami. So I went to school, let me clarify. I went to school in Miami at the very height of Fast and Furious mania, where you had the first movie was the second movie, it was just chaos. Whether it was street racers or bikes, cars or bikes, either way, it was a big presence in Miami. And most of the bike life people that I knew, man and woman alike, were very responsible. This type of, these type of antics were not what they were about. So it's a very specific group of persons that are engaged like that. I think for the most part, most of our bike life persons are very responsible. You see them in their letters, in their helmets, etc., and they are very big on safety. And that's what I said. I said in the meeting, I don't think that the bike life people who would be serviced by a drag strip are the people that are causing the ruckus on the road.
No, at all. And I can tell you,
and I don't think, like you said, I don't think it's going to solve the problem.
No, and I can tell you because my father used to ride bike, and this is like, he used to ride bikes, and and he would always tell me the minute.
Welcome to the Revelation podcast.
I told you knew this. Anyway, my father used to ride bike from time of the late 70s until I was about maybe 9 years old in 2000, whatever it was. But in the end of the day, he himself told me, and he was a person who would always be on a bike all over the place. He said, "This is not what we used to do.
Exactly.
This is not what biking is about." And I think it's again, is the glamorization of the danger.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
I have no problem with bikes. I think a lot of people have no problem with bikes. It's just that if you want to pop a wheelie and I'm in an intersection, chances are you're putting
Yeah.
everybody at risk.
Yeah.
I think it's more a question of understanding more than it is of trying to stop and punish people who ride bikes.
Yeah.
Because, you know.
I see. So yeah, Tim, just to be clear, I don't believe punishment is the answer. Thank you. Ralph, you both have spoken much on bipartisanship with our neighbors. So that's not so much a question, but yeah, we do, because it's something that we, as a faction, we've championed that in Parliament, to the point of even submitting a relationship development proposal.
Yeah.
Wherein Parliament drops Parlatino, which has not really yielded much ROI. They're very far away from us, very removed in that sense. And I think that those countries are kind of targeted on a higher level anyway than we could ever target. And focusing more on establishing better relationships with our immediate neighbors, which of course is the collectivité. You know, so I think a lot of look, we don't have a border. Symbolic border, yeah. But there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed jointly. I think you know that better than anyone. Because you tirelessly worked to highlight.
I think, I mean, you know, for me, working in foreign affairs, the whole world is going toward partnerships. And you know, everyone's talking about SDG 17 partnerships and how we need to work together. And with a small, we're 37 square miles, 16 belongs to the Dutch side. And we are trying to always do everything in competition with the French side.
Yes.
In competition with, beyond the French side, Anguilla, with BVI, with Antigua. I'm just like, you know, if we can all sort of, it's tough. This is very idealistic, I know, but you achieve a lot more together than you do alone. And I think going back to our best friend, Mia Motley, she's championing her network to achieve and push and drive what she wants. It's called lobbying. And in foreign affairs, I can tell you, as St. Martin, there's very little you can change as a small, non-independent country in the Caribbean that doesn't have anything that's politically interesting in terms of minerals, or oil, or gold. You have very limited say. And if you want to have something done, your first best friend in lobby is the French side. Unite one island. I mean, we've gone abroad and looked, for example, for investments for St. Martin sometimes in random discussions with people that we have. And they're like, we're coming with like, yeah, we have a $2 million, $3 million project. And they're like, oh, yeah, we kind of talking 30 million here. So cooperation is important.
Well, yeah, Ralph kind of clarified. Can you elaborate on your plans for deeper and effective relationships with the French and our neighbors? Was the question. Yeah. So no, like I figured. And that's why I said, you know, it's something that we have we've definitely promoted. We've spoken about it. Every question that I've asked when it comes to certainly even during COVID, my main question was, what is the collaboration with the French side? Are we coordinating and synchronizing our responses to COVID, our approach to COVID? You know, and then between that, there's also many people have talked about from a healthcare perspective, how can we collaborate? From a public transportation perspective, from a justice perspective, and I think justice has been the one area where there's been a lot of development.
Yes, I think
in bringing us closer together.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we in signing the border treaty earlier this year, there's finally a provision in this treaty that's going to finally create a platform, a joint cooperation platform, to discuss everything together. And a prime example of what justice is doing, justice, for example, if you want to extradite somebody, which basically somebody is a criminal or under investigation on the French side, but they want on the Dutch side. We have to send documents essentially from St. Martin to our embassy in Paris. The embassy in Paris sends it to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, back down, and you know, finding ways to make it simple. We proposed an article that you can actually say, okay, well, just email these documents across in a very expedited way, and you can get the person over to just sort of help justice. I mean, sometimes we like to think it's some massive thing you have to do, and it's sometimes a simple thing like make this article applicable in your legislation. Here it is, and you can cooperate a lot better. I think a lot of things justice has been pushing a lot in terms of safety. I must give the minister that. But I think, again, French-Dutch cooperation is seen as a general affairs, foreign affairs thing, instead of seeing how it impacts everything. So, for example, we saw it very clearly During COVID, there was like you couldn't go and get your calf. There was 4 million extra
Left uncollected.
euros uncollected. And I mean, you know, I tell people all the time, like the French side, that side is a very unique place where everybody, you know, half of our party, Melissa, Ray, Ludi, and myself, a couple of Marvio, all have connections with the French side. And I mean, you know, I went to school that side, you go on the weekends with your grandparents on the mango tree, have a picnic on the French side in Colombia. So that distinction is not there socially or culturally, but how do you do it in terms of you have to make it work as a country, you have to cooperate. It's impossible that, for example, we have a hurricane coming, a tropical storm coming this week, and the French side is on watch and we're on warning, and people don't know if to go work, so I'm just like, you know, we're getting there, but you have to cooperate on a small island like this. It's impossible.
I think just and you know, Ralph asked like elaborate more on the plans. I think the plans could be as something as simple as just a weekly contact call. It doesn't even have to be a meeting. I think a lot of times, and this is also something, you know, that I had to explain in Parliament when we presented our proposal. Sometimes it could just be like a Zoom call. Like we've done it. COVID taught us that you don't always have to get on a boat, you know. And indeed, we can see kind of the fruits of that proposal. So earlier this year, Vice President of this year or last year? I think it was last year. Vice President of Parliament, William Mallon, went to Anguilla when he was invited to go to Anguilla. Might have been this year. It was the opening of
the parliamentary.
No, not that. I think the ferry.
Like, the ferry. Okay.
But anyway, so he was invited over there because they were one of the islands that I said, you know, we need to start. Because there was a time where we all were already like that, I think. And you know, especially with Sabre and Stacia, you know, during COVID, I called out some colleagues because Sabre was like lockdown city, you know, and people took offense to that, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? It's their island, like you know, if you think that it's bad for us, we saw already on Sabre what just one person coming over from St. Martin back to Sabre caused in terms of COVID spread on Sabre. It's 5 square miles, guys. You know, so they took measures to protect themselves, which is entirely within their right. And persons were very like upset about it. We should shut it down and shut down the harbor and shut down shipping. And I'm like, what? But even with the French side, when the prefect was like, nah, it's you know, we're gonna be strict. They say we should stop the containers from driving over to Super U, and I'm like, so you want to starve the people that we are all pretty much related to?
And I think the really scary thing about that is, again, on an island with two countries, we had very different policies related to COVID. So for example, the French said, you know, random example, if we have 10 people, we shut down. For us, we said 20 people, we shut down. So again, it's a question of this joint cooperation platform that I mentioned that we have in this treaty. It's basically about how can we harmonize as much as possible to create sort of an actual relationship. Because right now, you know, I think some persons, some ministers are definitely doing it. I think Foreign Affairs, our office has been really pushing it. We have to sort of get this together. But this cooperation platform is step one. And understanding each other, because I can tell you, we've been in meetings sometimes where people really have no clue what the French side even is constitutionally and what we are and who has what authority or mandate. So that's the starting point.
I see we have a question asking, where is the PFP proposal for Parliament to meet with their elected colleagues in Marigot? Did it die in arrival or still parked on somebody's desk? I harass the SG frequently about this. The last update I had last week was that actually, from 2 weeks ago, we were supposed to actually meet this week. I think we're pending a response from the collectivité, because they themselves, because it's a new request, are having issues figuring out, well, who meets with who and, you know, so forth. That's the response that we've received. But we are in touch. I do ask for frequent updates about it. I know Garrick is tired of me, but you know, it's important to us. So yes, that was the last update that we had, that it essentially they are now trying to ascertain, you know, from okay, well, who would meet with Parliament, because who are their equals, etc. And so when we get that feedback, then we'll be able to have that meeting.
I mean, not to jump in the seat of the collectivity's government, but I think what we saw in Nas Antilles days was that the Executive Council acted like what is currently the executive, so the ministers, and the island council, the broader executive with all the members became the parliament. So hint, hint, how you can solve this conundrum. But I think at a government level, we have met a lot with the sort of ministerial level, as well as the combined territorial council, so the non-actual the non-coalition government in America, the opposition to speak. But again, I think the problem always is that French-Dutch relations is not a policy, it's a personality. And that's the problem. Because if one minister, government says, the French are important for me, which we've had, then essentially it's not important and the whole relationship falls apart. And that's why you really have to empower your organization and government to say, listen, what are your policies? What are you working on? And let's see if it fits and how can I support this? Not, I come in, all of a sudden I want to work with importing and making cell phones. Well, guess what? We don't have that kind of economy in mind. Well, let's figure it out. No, our priorities are this as government. You're elected for 4 years. See how you can push this. You have to empower your organization. Yeah, definitely agree. Well, Patrice, it's been wonderful having you. Yeah, this went too fast. My gosh, went pretty fast. Yeah, it's been great having you on the line. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do be sure to come back. I will. I will have bush tea next time for you. Bush tea, lemongrass. Yes, sugar. Or sweet basil is nice. No, sweet basil. Sugar, no sugar. No sugar. Okay. No sugar. But no, thank you everyone for joining in, and thank you everybody for your questions. We really appreciated them. Next week we will be back. I won't be here, but it will probably be you and someone else. We'll keep it going. We're changing it up, so it's gonna be interesting how that goes down. But thank you again for joining us, and I do hope everyone enjoys their Sunday evening. Tomorrow is another week, so let's make it a good one. And happy Constitution Day in advance. Happy Constitution Day in advance, indeed. And do check out, I think the cultural manifestations. So the event starts at Bel Air tomorrow morning. 8:30 to 11. Check, 8:30 to 11. Yes, 8:30 to 11. And then I think in the evening is it the evening? Is there an evening program? Let me check with our let's double check. Cultural maestro, Clara Reyes. I think she messaged me about it. There is only in the morning I'm seeing something. Yeah, actually it's a cultural and a spiritual manifestation in the morning. Yes. At the Bel Air Community Center. Yes, so definitely if you're able to, I think it's open to the public. Yeah. So do go and check that out. I have been enjoying the cultural manifestations that have been coming out, particularly when the royal family was visiting. Very beautiful. They invited all the different communities on St. Martin to kind of and I think big up to particularly the Department of Culture for spotlighting a lot of what is St. Martin's culture. Yeah. I think we don't give a lot of value to culture and history, and I'm a history buff, and I think putting out more in the spotlight and giving support to that's very important. Yes, so definitely happy Constitution Day in advance. Do check out what has been put on by the Department of Culture, because we could plan it, but everybody has to come to it. Yeah, so that's how it works. So enjoy the rest of the Sunday and join us next week.